Jim Sullivan has been with the U.S. Navy for quite a while. After 6 years of uniformed service as an officer, he became a civilian employee on Treasure Island. He is the last staff member of Naval Station Treasure Island that's still associated with the island. He's working in the base closure office. He used to be here, and now he works in San Diego and has responsibility all up and down the West Coast. He was one of the authors of a history of Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island, the naval history that was written around 1995, just before Naval Station Treasure Island closed. And today we're lucky to have him here up from San Diego to tell us about the century of naval history on these islands. Jim.
Well, first I'd like to thank Walt and the Museum Association for inviting me to be here this morning. As I began putting this together, I realized this is a big topic, and I could have hundreds of slides, but I don't this morning. So I'm going to mainly focus on the period from the beginning of the naval station on Yerba Buena Island up through World War II, and then I can talk to the post-World War II period and the eventual closure of the base. So I do want to add that I'm here although I work for the Department of the Navy, I'm here as an individual. I drove up here on my own. I'm happy to be here to talk to you. So anything I say is not meant to be the official position of the United States Navy or the Department of Defense or the President or the federal government. So. But as best I can, I'm trying to provide you with a factual account of the history of Yerba Buena and Treasure Island, and I'll try to go for maybe about 45 minutes. I'll have to pace myself, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you have a really burning particular question about a particular slide, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll need to kind of keep on pace in order to finish up at a reasonable time. Let's see. One of the things I realized that about Treasure, a lot of times a lecture will start or a talk will start with like a premise. Not always, but sometimes. And I think the premise here is that in the Pacific, the Pacific War and the U.S. Navy and Marines in the Pacific didn't center around any one base. It was really every base doing its part, whether here in the Bay Area, whether it's Treasure Island or Mare Island or Hunters Point or Alameda or Moffett Field, and then our other bases to the south, Camp Pendleton for the Marines, and all of the San Diego area bases, as well as our Hawaii bases and other bases such as Guam and Midway. So it was really all these bases working together, both for the Pacific, both for World War II and for the post-war period, all the way to the present. And so I just wanted to sort of set that as my premise. So I think TI definitely played its part in that effort, both TI and YBI. But what I realized that maybe is a little different about TI, but I'm sure there's other bases that have similar circumstances. That at TI we didn't build ships. We didn't do much repair ships except towards the end of World War II. We didn't repair, a little bit of airplane repair, seaplane repair during World War II, but other than that, not a lot of airplane repair. We weren't really a major supply center because there was a supply center in Oakland. Most of the activities at Treasure Island centered about the sailor and marine. So the history of TI and YBI is a lot about the individual sailor or marine, and I think that does make Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island a special place. So let me just launch in next. And I do have as a prop, this is a more current photo of the naval station. This is probably just about 1 year old, 2012. So I can use that to talk a little bit about the post World War II period. So first off, just wanted to start with a cartoon. This is actually out of this book, The Naval History of Treasure Island. This is a great book. This was actually published by the Navy in 1946. So it represents the period up basically through 1945. This was published by the Navy. It was, as far as I know, it hasn't been republished. It's written in a little more of it. It's not a historical text. It's written a little bit more like a college or high school yearbook. I think it was really written for the common person in the Navy and Marines. So it doesn't have unfortunately it doesn't have an index. It doesn't have a list of references. It's heavy on pictures, but that's a good thing too, because I used a lot of them, including this cartoon. But it does, if you have a chance to look at it, it does paint a very detailed picture of life on Treasure Island through 1945. So as I mentioned, it's no longer published. Although if you go on the internet, there's copies floating around, and there's free PDFs of it as well. So it is available at the very least in electronic form. And if you search enough, you might be able to find your own copy. Somebody was good enough some years ago to find this copy for me on eBay and buy it for me. So I appreciate having a copy. So this cartoon is right out of the history there. So it basically is representing the World War II period after the base had been converted from the fair. And here's a potential fairgoer driving up, wanting to get in to see the fair, which had already closed and the base converted. So just a little joke. So going all the way back to the beginning. In the beginning, of course, there was no Treasure Island. Yerba Buena Island is a natural island, and actually the story of the uniformed services on Yerba Buena Island really starts before the Navy. The Navy wasn't here first, and what was here first was this Army post. A small garrison was detailed from the Presidio of San Francisco to set up a garrison here on Yerba Buena Island in about 1867. And so this is a CAD drawing that was made back in the 90s. It's based on other drawings. So this is meant to depict the buildings that made up this encampment. It's not very large. It was really only down in this eastern area of Yerba Buena Island. So it's lettered, so it includes things like A, B, and C were the officers' quarters, D was the hospital, E was a guardhouse, F was an engineer storehouse. Then you had a wharf, and then other buildings such as a boathouse, a bakery, barracks, mess hall, laundry, and then the parade ground in the middle. So this garrison was here in the latter part of the 1800s. One permanent building that the Army, well, I think I have that on another slide, but there's one, all of these buildings are gone now, but there is one building remaining that was built in 1891, and that's the torpedo building. So that was actually built by the Army. Okay, let me get through a few slides and I can talk a little bit more on that. Now there was one other party besides the Army that got here first. Got here before the Navy, and that was the Coast Guard. But actually, it was the predecessor of the Coast Guard, the Lighthouse Service. So they built a light at the southeast corner of Yerba Buena Island in about 1875. They've maintained their facilities since that time. They've actually expanded over time. What was originally the Lighthouse Service merged with the Revenue Cutter Service, and which is what formed the U.S. Coast Guard of today. While the naval base here is closed, the Coast Guard is still there on Yerba Buena Island. Next. So, in 1898, the Navy established a naval training station and receiving ship here on Yerba Buena Island. So this photo shows the pre-Treasure Island YBI. The main, there's some other photos, but the quarters are up here. These are the same quarters that are here today, quarters 1 through 7. And then the barracks and main part of the naval training station was down on the flats. These buildings are all gone now. As is this wharf. And then there was another wharf over here. The Coast Guard area is currently here now. Then there were some other buildings up on the top of the island. This is the one building from the Army era that remains. This is the Torpedo Building. It's a concrete building built in 1891. So when the naval station was operating, it was the oldest building in our inventory. At some point, I think in the World War II period, the Army left completely, and so this torpedo building came into the custody of the naval station. The reason it's called the Torpedo Building has nothing to do with submarine torpedoes. Torpedo was an older term for floating mine, and one of the Army's missions was the defense of the San Francisco Bay Harbor. As some of you may know, they had gun emplacement, and they also maintained this mine system. So this building was, sometimes this building's been referred to as the Mine Assembly Building, because this is a building where they actually assembled the mine, what they were earlier called torpedoes. So this building remains today. The new east span of the Bay Bridge goes directly over the top of this building now. Next. So this is a little bit of a closer view, probably of maybe about the same era. You see the quarters up here. Here's quarters 1, so it goes quarters 1 through 7. Quarters 1 was built in 1900, and then this larger building was the main barracks hall, and then there were other buildings clustered around it. You can't quite see it in this view, but there were other smaller support buildings to the north behind this barracks building, and then you had this wharf, which has been listed as the Long Wharf, and then a shorter wharf here, and then a training ship. As you can see, the very eastern portion of Yerba Buena Island is relatively barren. I think it was largely undisturbed until the construction of the Bay Bridge in the 1930s. And then later on, the Navy put a few buildings up here as well during the World War II period. But this represents the Naval Training Station in the early 1900s. This was a wide-angle view, so I've got it cut up, and then I brought it together in another slide. So this is another close-up view of what we saw before. Here's quarters 1, now also known as the Nimitz House, quarters 2, 3, 4, all the way to quarters 7. At one time, there was a tennis court in the lawn here. That's been gone for some period of time, so if you went out there now, you would just see a long lawn. There's a hedge that runs about halfway down, but there doesn't seem to be any trace of the former tennis court. And then this is the main barracks building, and then you can see all of the sailors in training on parade in the flat area here. If you went out there today, this is all the Caltrans construction area, so it still remains a relatively flat area, but it's all consumed by the Bay Bridge construction efforts. Next. So this is just panning to the right, the same barracks we saw, and then the east end of YBI, and then the wharf, the same long wharf leading out. Next. And then this is just all the way out to the end of the wharf, and there's another training ship there. I think this ship might be the Boston. There was one ship that was used for training for a long time or training as a receiving ship on Yerba Buena Island, the USS Boston, which was actually part of the original Great White Fleet. And then this is everything stitched together. So this represents an area from about here to about here. Next. We were fortunate enough to find some 1917 photos of life at the Yerba Buena Naval Training Station. This one was labeled as wash house, and it appears that they're washing their clothes here on some sort of flat concrete table, although they don't look all that happy about doing it. So this is a series, I'll kind of flip through these. This is just a series of 1917 era photos of the original naval station. This is kind of looking to the south. That's the barracks building there, and then these are those kind of smaller support buildings that I mentioned. And they're actually labeled on here: main barracks, carpenter shop, blacksmith's shop, and then paint shop, and then some SW tank. Next, please. Here's another one. This is the dispensary, or the medical. Looks like everyone's lined up for sick call. And then there's a ship in the background here. Next. And then another dispensary. I think this may be another different building. Again, you see people lined up. Next.
When were most of these buildings built?
Right around the early 1900s. Basically, the Naval Training Station was established in 1898, and that's when they started construction, and probably, over some period of years. I know that Quarters 1 was built in 1900, so probably the other buildings were all in similar time frame. So again, this is the parade ground, 2 shots of that. Well, here's one building that actually has, I am assuming this is the date that it was built, 1907. Must be building 13. This actually says gymnasium on it. Next. And then this is the end of this long wharf. Next. And then this looks like it's on top of the island or at a higher elevation. It's called the radio operator's dormitory. So there was probably a radio antenna, which appropriately would be somewhere near the highest point on the island. Next. And recruit house. Next. There's 2 photos here. I'll just start with this one. This is signal tower. This actually shows it under construction. And then you can also see these tents here in the early, I think through the World War I or in the early 1900s, for the recruits, a lot of them lived in tent structures. Or at least probably, maybe, I don't want to speculate too much, but maybe with the expansion during the World War I era. But there were, in various photos, you can see large numbers of tents. Next. So this is actually the same structure completed. Same tents as well. At first I thought this was the same signal tower that's currently up on YBI, but I was looking at the windows on this and looking at the windows of the current signal tower, and I think it's a different. It may have been reconstructed. I think I do have a slide that shows the current signal tower, and the configuration of the windows are a little different.
Now the tower with the guidance, is that a radio tower or is that used to guide flags on the screen?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I have information I can find to research that. I do know that the signal tower was used for flags as well as was used for flags as well as for visual lookout. But whether or not this is a radio antenna, or it almost seems like it's getting too tall to be for flags. It almost looks to me like it's a radio mast with guy wires on it. But I'll see if I can find some more information about that. Next. Stables. And you see some early 1900s equipment, including some sort of a roller. They probably had a lot of gravel roads and walkways, and maybe they were using this to compact it. So that was kind of the series of early Yerba Buena Island slides. The Naval Training Station operated through World War I, but in 1923, the Navy made a decision to move the Naval Training Station from Yerba Buena Island to San Diego. So a new Naval Training Station opened in San Diego in about And the mission of the the station at Yerba Buena Island kind of downsized to what's called a receiving ship or receiving station. And basically a receiving ship or station is a onshore facility for personnel to transfer to and from ships. So it's kind of what it sounds like, receiving. So that function continued after the Naval Training Station moved to San Diego. I just put this up as kind of a segue to, where we started with Treasure Island. So this, of course, you've probably seen before. This is it actually came from a brochure from the fair. So this shows a illustration of what the fair looked like in 39 and 40. And then the Navy arrived. There were discussions in 1940 and in 1941. The Navy started operating at Treasure Island by 1941. In the background here is one of the fair buildings. This is one of the large, I think what was referred to as the palaces. So these were one of the main exhibition halls, and I have a couple of other slides on this as well. So these large, the permanent structures like buildings 1, 2, and 3, these large exhibition halls, these were retained for use by the new naval station at Treasure Island. And this is the foundation of the Tower of the Sun. So this was the foundation from it. And actually, this foundation still exists today. It was ground down to ground level at one point. I don't know how deep it goes, but they just ground it down to ground level and paved over it at some point in time. But in 1989, when we had the Loma Prieta earthquake, the island consolidated a little bit. I mean, not a lot, a couple inches, but what looked like, it looked like if you drove around the island, it looked like things were popping up from the ground, but actually it was the ground that was sinking a little, maybe just consolidating is probably more the appropriate term, but it was like a one-time consolidation. It wasn't like a continual sinking. So what happened was this foundation suddenly appeared, or at least it kind of protruded. You could see the bulge in the asphalt. So then Navy Public Works had to go back out and grind this back down to ground level. But I don't know if I haven't been out there recently, and I don't know if there's been any recent repaving out there, but it's possible that if you went out there now, you might still see some faint outline of this foundation still. Yes, sir?
Where is it on the map?
It would be right about here. Because this road here is, well, I have another slide, but it would be approximately here. There's currently I think it's like a little mini mart or something here, and I think it's in that general vicinity, but it's definitely along this street area here. Next. So the Navy was on Treasure Island, and again, this is one of the fair buildings repurposed for the Navy. And I also included this slide because, this is typical of what you see on a naval base. Sailors marching in the street, all the way up through when the base was operating in the 1990s. We had trainees here, and they would still march down the streets as part of their training. Next. I'll probably flip through these a little faster, but this is just a series of slides. This is actually from 1944, but I think it's probably representative of the construction activity by the Navy to build all of these World War II era structures. So again, you can see this is one of the old fair buildings here. I think we're probably looking along the western shoreline of the island. If I had a map handy with the building numbers, these drawings are nice enough to have the building numbers labeled on them, so that's pretty handy for doing research. So the Navy started constructing all of these World War II, all of these wooden structures, some of which still exist today. If you drive around the island and see a 1 or 2 story wooden structure, chances are it's probably of the World War II era. Next. Well, this, of course, is looking along the west side of the island. I think that fair building was off to here, and so here's some of those newly constructed buildings. One thing I just want to briefly mention, I don't have a slide for it, is that kind of one of the interesting stories of Treasure Island is that for probably about the last year or so, just at the end of World War II, towards the end of World War II, there was actually a POW camp here at Treasure Island. And I think it was kind of at the north end of the Great Lawn, so it might have been in this general vicinity here. And there were at least German, and I think it was all came from the European theater. There were German, and I'm not sure if there were any Italian prisoners, but I know there were German prisoners here. And they were here for maybe about the last year or so of the war, and maybe just in the immediate post-war period before they were repatriated. And the enlisted POWs performed, various job functions around the naval station. But interestingly, a couple of years ago, I got a call, or I got an email from an Army representative in Germany, and he had a friend who had been a POW at Naval Station Treasure Island and was asking about it. So with the help of some of my coworkers, we put together a little care package of some photos, both from the World War II era and the current era, just to show this gentleman what the island looked like then and now. And we sent that out to. Fortunately, because we were sending it to the Army, we weren't really sending it to Germany. We were sending it to the military post office. So we sent that out, and then I heard back from the Army representative that the German gentleman was very appreciative of having gotten it. Yes, sir.
Approximately how many prisoners?
I don't think there were a lot. May have only been, in the. I'll speculate a little bit and say it's probably we're only talking about in the several hundreds, or probably. I can't imagine that there would be like over 1,000 or a certain. I mean, it definitely wasn't in the thousands because it was confined to a fairly small area, maybe only involving one or two buildings. So there's actually a lot of interesting history. The internet's a great thing. I sure wish I had it when I was in college. But there's actually if you Google on German or some variation of POWs in America. There's a lot of information out there, and there were various POW camps scattered about the United States during the World War II era, and it's a very, very interesting story. So one of the little interesting stories of Treasure Island. Next. And I'll just flip through these. These are just more construction. Next. More construction. More construction, more construction, and this is actually this was that area before they built those buildings. So this is the Great Lawn area. What the title refers to now is the Great Lawn. So what we call, or what sometimes are called the Star Barracks, or the big asterisks here, would be off to the right here. Of course, they weren't here then because this photo is from 1944. But then this lawn area, or this area here, is this area here. Next. So this is another photo kind of showing the development of Treasure Island after the fair by the Navy. You can see Building 1 where we are here now. This is Building 180. Sometimes people think that this may have been, when you look at it now, it has a little bit of it has kind of a GGIE look to it. And actually that's not coincidental. Well, the building itself was built by the Navy during the World War II era. And originally it had a more plain corrugated siding to it, but in the early 90s the building underwent a rehab. This is before the base closure, and so the naval station was trying to get a more unified look, so we were painting buildings in similar colors, and new buildings that were constructed, we were looking to the GGIE for kind of inspiration. So if you look at this building now, it was kind of purposely resided to more resemble a GGIE era building. Likewise, if you go to the what used to be the Navy Medical Dental Center, and is now part of the Job Corps, that building also has a GGIE. This building was newly constructed in the 1990s, and this building also has kind of a GGIE look to it, and that was definitely on purpose. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of orienting this was the Tower of the Sun. You can actually see the little pavilion that was built on top of it that we saw in the earlier photo here. And then these are the original exhibition buildings that the Navy repurposed. So then the Navy built Building 180 here, and then all of these various smaller structures are these, World War II era wooden structures, some of which still remain today. For example, and I think I have another slide somewhere in the set, but this was the Officers Club here, which eventually later became known as the Fleet Admiral Nimitz Club. Then it became the Fleet Admiral Nimitz Conference Center, and then I think TIDA has leased it out to a private operator now, but this was the original Officers Club, and these are the tennis courts that went with the Officers Club. So this building and these tennis courts are still here today. And there's other buildings in this photo. This was the old post office building, which it's closed, but it's boarded up, but it's still here today. Next. This is a really interesting photo. I'm sorry, it's hard to make. Well, the original is not perfect. It's hard to show it on a single slide here, but this photo was taken, and it's nice enough to be dated for us on February 20th, 1945. So I think this probably represents really the peak of activity on Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island, and probably the peak of buildings on the island. So as you can see on the southern, so this is just to fit on here. This is actually north is in this direction. The island isn't actually north on an exact north-south axis, so it's tilted slightly. Although on a lot of our Navy maps and other figures, it's shown in this configuration just because it fits on a more standard size drawing plan sheet. So probably the southern 2/3 of the island are largely covered by structures, and you can't see it as well. You probably can't see it in this here, but if you zoom in, somebody actually took this photograph and they hand lettered in all of the building numbers on it. So this is a great resource for anyone who is researching buildings, and so I've used it quite a bit. It would have been right about here. So there was these series of buildings here, and this is sort of the north end here, so it would have been about here.
You had the great view?
Pardon?
You had the great view?
Yeah, they did. They did.
Were they involved in any construction or any work on the island?
They were, from what I read a little bit, I mean, I think they were involved in like work details, probably more of the maintenance and cleaning variety. Okay, next. This is also another good, this is actually a drawing. This is another cartoon out of the book here. But this also labels, well, not all of, but a lot of the building usages. And actually, it actually says POW somewhere right about here. So a lot of the basic functions of the naval station are labeled on this cartoon. So this is also a handy reference. Although since it's a cartoon, probably have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt, but it's probably reasonably accurate. Next. Oh, and the one thing, it's unfortunate, but it's too bad that they didn't extend this to Yerba Buena Island. I would have loved to see a similar cartoon for Yerba Buena Island. It's a little harder to trace the history on Yerba Buena Island than it is on Treasure Island. Next. So now talking about some of the functions at the naval station. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the naval station on Treasure Island served a lot of people functions, and I just wanted to touch on some of the major ones. This was one activity we had at the naval station was the guard center, the Armed Guard Center for the Pacific. And there's a lot of history on this as well if you do some internet research on this. But the Armed Guard was formed during World War II in order to provide armed sailors to merchant ships, like Victory ships. So these detachments were trained at various locations around the country, and then they were sent to these armed guard centers. And at Treasure Island, I think there was only 3 armed guard centers. I think one for the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Gulf Coast. And so the Treasure Island Center covered the Pacific area. So sailors were assigned to the Armed Guard Pacific. They would be trained, and then they would be sent out as detachments on these merchant ships. And then this was considered their home port. They would come back to Treasure Island. This is where their personnel records and their training needs and all their other needs would be taken care of when they came off the ship. Next. So this is just showing this was probably used for training purposes for the armed guard. This is actually one of the ships with a gun mounted on it. Next. Accommodations. And I complained when I had 1 or 2 roommates in school, but it appears that this certainly looks like, I've never seen the inside, or I don't think I've seen a photo of what the inside of one of the palace structures look like, but this looks to me like it's either building 2 or building 3. In the original, this kind of looks like it's just based on having been in and out of buildings 2 and 3 quite a bit, this looks like it could be either one of those, but I can't say that for absolutely certain. So, they just basically took space that was available and turned it into barrack space. Next. Coming and going. Well, this is kind of the start of a series of slides talking about personnel, leaving for the Pacific and coming back from the Pacific. And part of the activities at Treasure Island, because of the large number of personnel here, were Hollywood entertainers, and you can probably recognize Bob Hope here, entertaining the troops somewhere on Treasure Island. The picture's too small to try to figure out, where exactly that might be. Next. So here are either sailors on their way out to the Pacific. This photo was labeled "Start of a Long Journey." There is a building, whether it's the same one or not. There's a building that still exists here it's this building here. If you drive past it, it's an open shed. There's no sides to it. So so this is either the same building here or a similar building here, and it was an open air shed like this to keep personnel out of the weather while they were waiting to board a ship or coming off a ship.
Where were the ships docked?
Well, we actually there were a lot more piers around the island here. So there were piers along here. So there were quite. I think if we don't come to another slide on that, I'll try to flip back. But there were many more piers here originally than what there are now. And again, it looks like we have sailors coming off a ship. Another reason I included this is that if this is the gas station, if you drive around the island here. This was the base gas station. You can see the drive-in bays and the gas pumps here. It closed when the base closed in 1997, and I think a recent lessee of the city is converting this to a wine tasting room. So I think a lot of the pumps are all gone. It looks a little different. I think the bays. I think you can still see the bays if you drive by here, but it's the same structure. Next, and again, more sailors. I think this is probably the same structure, which may be the same structure over here. Next, and again, these are probably Marines, judging by their garb. Again, probably on the eastern side of the island, getting ready to board a ship. I think they're within this fenced area because there was a whole process that it's talked a lot about in the book here. They developed a really organized process for getting sailors and Marines ready to go overseas and getting them all their paperwork, all their medical, and then putting them all in one place so that they could board the ships as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Next. I just thought this was interesting, just about war bonds, how it was very important during World War II period, the bond drives. So this guy bought bonds, this guy didn't. And I'm thinking this is probably meant to be President Roosevelt, judging by the face and the glasses, and the donkey. Next. So training. So in addition to processing incoming and outgoing personnel, training was a big activity of the naval station, and it remained a significant activity in the naval station up until the base closed in 1997. So all sorts of training went on. This is some sort of electrical training here. This is boiler training here. Next. This is all shipboard handling, cargo. Looks like there's some shore mock-ups of a ship, probably to train sailors on handling lines. This also looks like it's cargo related. Next. The chapel, which is right across the street. It hasn't changed a whole lot since it was built in around 1943. Next. This is the interior of the chapel. Again, if you walked into the interior, it wouldn't look a whole lot different. I think these lighting fixtures may still be there. Next. There's two photos here. I really like these photos. And so this one's labeled First Stateside Chow. This guy's obviously a Marine. You can see the MC on here. This guy's probably, judging by his garb, is either a Marine or maybe a Seabee. And you can see how happy they are to be getting some good food coming home. And then take a look at this guy, and then next slide. I'm pretty sure this is the same guy. So I thought that this is probably one of my favorite photos from this book here. I mean, you can just tell how happy this guy is to be home and to have a stateside meal. Next. And then this is one of the galleys. I'm sure there was more than one. Next. This is a 5-inch gun trainer, and I think, and I probably should go out and take a photo, I think this is the same 5-inch gun that's sitting on the east side of Building 2, because I recognize this is concrete here. These are the indentations from the planks from the forms when the concrete was poured, and I think it may be the same gun. I'll have to try to take a picture from the same orientation and see if it matches up. But the reason it sits on top of this is like a one-story concrete pedestal, is that because the gun consists of what's above deck as well as what's below deck, and that includes where the shells are loaded and other equipment and that. So this would have been used for training purposes. Next. The naval station also had a hospital that was located, well, what's now a rugby field is, and I think this is the same building. It looks similar. The buildings were actually still existed into the very early 90s, but had been vacant and they were torn down. Next. Just some photos of the Naval Hospital. You probably recognize this gentleman here. This, I think, is Sonia Henning. Next. More training. I should have put all those slides together. Training in knots. Next. This, I believe, is the current signal tower at the top of YBI. And when I compared this one to those World War I era photos, the windows look different. I think the height is taller, so I think it may be a different structure. But this structure still does exist, and it sits directly at the highest point on Yerba Buena Island, almost above the tunnel. And this is a teletype machine, so electronics training. Treasure Island had a lot of radio, radar, sonar, electronics-related training during World War II and in the post-World War II era as well. Next. The WAVES. I had to think about it for a minute to remember exactly what WAVES stand for. Women Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Service. So there was a WAVE detachment here on Treasure Island. They had their own little compound. I'm just kind of roughly approximating. It was on the eastern side of the island here. And so they provided service to the naval station during the World War II era. Next. I like this photo. Does anyone see what's a little unusual about this photo? The sailor on the right is pointing her weapon at the photographer. Yeah, I don't think I'd want to be the photographer. I mean, normally you wouldn't want a weapon pointed at you under any circumstances, because you never really know what the status is. But now hopefully the photographer had one of those remote clickers so he could stand off a couple of feet. But I like this photo. But I got this from the Naval Historical Center, and this was a pistol range at Treasure Island. Next. The Marines, certainly have to talk about the Marines. The Marines were here on Treasure Island from the beginning. At some point, the Marines barracks closed on Treasure Island. Even into the 90s, there was a Marines district office on the southeast end of the island, but there wasn't a Marine barracks here. But certainly during the World War II era and probably for some period post-war, the Marines were here at Treasure Island. So this, of course, is right in front of the building here. This was the flagpole that, unfortunately, sometime in the last 10 years or so ago, they found that this flagpole had rotted, and so for safety reasons, they needed to cut it off. So if you walked out there today, if you have a chance, you'll see the stub of the flagpole there. Another interesting thing, I think, is I think a lot of these palm trees are still the original trees, and so if you looked out at the same palm today, it's much taller than it was back in the World War II era here. Next. So here's Marines doing what Marines do. And I'm sure they did many other things around the naval station, but part of their duties was to provide security for the naval station. In later years, we had either sailors providing security or at various times civilian Department of Defense police. But for this period of time, the Marines provided the security for the naval station. Next. Other activities on the island, repair activities. So here's one of the seaplanes. I haven't been able to figure out exactly where this is. It's somewhere along the south end of the island here in the cove, and I think this is probably this photo is looking towards the cove, and I think this is just some sort of a small structure to cover. I don't think this is one of the main hangars. I think this is a small structure just to cover up the aircraft during maintenance. So this would have been probably, I can't really tell exactly what type of seaplane this in. This may have been one of the Navy seaplanes, because in addition to the Pan Am facilities, the Navy operated its own out here as well. I think we're getting close to the end. Okay, next. Other repair activities going on. When the naval shipyards in the Bay Area became full up, TI took on a repair of some smaller ships. Next. Just a few familiar buildings. This is the Casa de la Vista. This is 1940s, but this is the same Casa de la Vista that's just up the street here, past the chapel. Next. And then, as I mentioned, this is the Officers Club and the tennis courts, both of which are here today. The fair building in the background, which is long gone, and then Job Corps built a gymnasium back here now that's on their property. So this building sits now where the Job Corps is now. Anyway, one thing about these large fair buildings, by 1947, there was a series of fires, and I think these buildings were all built. They were never meant to be permanent structures. So there were a couple of fires, and the Navy came to the conclusion that it was really not safe to continue to use them, and so there was a period of demolition post-war, and these remaining large fair structures were taken down. Next. This is this last, just another one of the cartoons about waiting in line for the movie theater. Questions? I think we're, unfortunately, I apologize for running long, but... Well, there was radar and sonar, and it may have been that fire control might have been associated with that.
There was a firefighter.
Pardon?
There was a firefighter.
Oh, there was, yes, there was a firefighter.
The Navy was seated at 50 years ago.
Yeah. The original fire training facility was up here, and then in the 1990s we built a new one here, which is now operated by the San Francisco Fire Department. Next.
Jim, would you please repeat the question?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I should have done that. Yeah. There was a question about where the firefighting school was, and I think also a question about where if any fire control is in fire control of weapons or fire control of. Oh, firefighting school. Yes. Yeah. So, Yeah, so we had a firefighting school during World War II and all the way up through when the base closed in 1997. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Jim, in light of the tremendous number of people that came through here, all of whom have children and grandchildren, these stories are tremendously important. Does the Navy have a place or an interest in keeping this story alive, or is Library of Congress or any university, but how can we keep these stories from just disappearing?
Well, the Navy has a history center. So a lot of the information on Treasure Island was, when the base closed, documents and other items were transferred to both the National Archives and the Navy Historical Center in Washington. So both of those are available as a resource. We have a local branch of the archives right here in San Bruno, and then there's other archives around the country.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
There's also mock-ups of a ship, which would allow people to.
Yes, that was the Buttercup, and it's actually still here. Well, it was built in I don't know if there was an earlier version of it, but the version that's still here now was built in the 1950s, and it was basically a simple mock-up of a ship that sits in a big tank of water, and you train to make sure that you can plug all the holes. When I went through that school in Newport, Rhode Island, unfortunately it was January in Newport, Rhode Island. The water wasn't heated, and we didn't do a very good job. And by the time we got all the holes plugged, it was getting close to my nose. So, yes. Yes, it's inside a building. It's just a plain 1950s steel building located actually right there. It's actually right near the Little League field.
So let's thank Jim for.
And I just want to thank you, each and every one of you for coming this morning. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. It certainly makes it worthwhile to be out here.